Today, Republican governors in both Indiana and Arkansas signed new versions of religious freedom laws, bending to the huge backlash against these laws' potential support for anti-gay discrimination. The scene in Indiana was especially unusual. There you had a Republican governor basically backing two very different versions of this bill within 7 days. Now, the new version prohibits businesses from denying service to members of the LGBT community.
So in reaching the agreement to clarify the law, which will unequivocally state, as the Speaker said, in the strongest possible terms, that Indiana's RFRA law does not and will not be able to discriminate against anyone, anywhere, at any time.
And there was a lot of action today because just hours later, the Republican-controlled House and Senate of the Indiana legislature passed a similar legislative fix. And this evening, Governor Mike Pence signed it. We can't show you that, though, because he didn't invite cameras in for that particular ceremony. The protections that will now be afforded to the LGBT community in Indiana and the effort to extend those protections more broadly in that state was summed up by Chris Douglas, president of the Indiana Rainbow Chamber of Commerce, who identifies himself as a gay Republican.
The measure announced today, for the first time in Indiana, law establishes sexual orientation and gender identity in the context of recognizing and protecting our rights as equal citizens of the state of Indiana. We know that this is only the beginning. The end is that the equality guaranteed to all other Hoosiers through the Indiana Civil Rights Code is guaranteed also to us.
Meanwhile, in Arkansas today, Governor Asa Hutchinson signed a religious freedom law just 24 hours after he'd asked legislators to change it to eliminate the potential for any use there for discrimination. Joining me now, syndicated columnist Dan Savage, host of the Savage Love podcast, and Sarah Warbelow, legal director of the Human Rights Campaign. Good evening to you both.
Good evening.
Good evening to you, too.
I think you're overstating the impact of what happened today in Indiana and in Arkansas. The law that what Mike Pence signed today makes it impossible to use the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana to justify anti-gay discrimination or anti-lesbian, bi, trans discrimination. All of that is, however, still legal in Indiana. There is no statewide LGBT civil rights protections in Indiana. What now is not going to happen is people are not going to be able, in the municipalities in Indiana, the cities that have LGBT civil rights protections, point to this law to justify discrimination, but everywhere else, they don't need to point to this law to justify discrimination. So they can still just discriminate at will against LGBT people all over Indiana. They just can't point to this law when they do it.
Certainly.
It's kind of a distinction without a difference.
Well, certainly, yes. I think the legal status quo there in those states is not very advanced, but the notion that you have these conservative states and these Republican legislators saying, well, even in the, okay, just confined to this new law, we need to treat this as a protected class. Do you view that as progress?
It is a tiny step forward. This is an exploding cigar that just exploded in the faces of the religious right that backed these laws because they wanted to legalize discrimination, then claimed that the laws didn't legalize discrimination, and are now complaining that the laws specifically disallow the legalization of discrimination. They want it every which way. The situation in Arkansas, however, is worse because the governor of Arkansas just allowed a bill to become law without his signature that basically trumps, at the state level, all local municipal civil rights protections for LGBT people. So the status quo in Arkansas is bad, has gotten worse, and the amendment of Arkansas's Religious Freedom Act did nothing to change that. Arkansas has gone backwards in the last few months, and just the sort of face-saving, window-dressing amendment to their Religious Freedom Act doesn't change anything. And we need to make a noise about that, about what's going on in Arkansas, because all the corporate entities that complained about Arkansas legalizing discrimination against LGBT people all over the state shouldn't be satisfied by what Arkansas did today, because discrimination against LGBT people all over Arkansas is still the law of the land.
Right.
And municipal laws won't protect LGBT people in Arkansas the way they will in Indiana.
Dan's absolutely right. These laws or these so-called fixes don't go nearly far enough. Each of these RFRAs needs to be further refined to clarify that in no way can they be used to undermine existing civil rights and non-discrimination laws. And then beyond that, both of these states need to affirmatively adopt explicit protections for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people in every area of their civil rights law. It's the only way to move forward.
So what do you think of the companies then? Do you think there's a little bit of doublespeak going on?
Not in the least bit. These companies have proven over and over again that they really value their LGBT employees and they want to see them protected in every area of their lives. It's why hundreds of corporations have not only spoken out against these religious freedom restoration acts, but have explicitly called on these legislatures to adopt protections.
Dan, I want to play for you something that Britt Hume said today on Fox News, comparing some of this progress.
Really, must you?
Well, you'll get
Please,
a chance to speak to it, but he's basically comparing the progress here to the civil rights movement, although he has some concerns about that. Take a listen.
This movement has now achieved something like one of the things it's always hoped for is something like the consensus, or it hopes it has something like the consensus that was achieved by the original civil rights movement, where being a racist has become and has long been one of the worst things that you could be called and one of the worst tags you could be tarred with. My own view is that there is a large number of people across this country who are not sympathetic to the way this is going. And that Republicans, some of whom look like they're running scared today, might be well advised to stick to their guns.
Dan, your response?
Yeah, there are Republicans out there who will continue to appeal to the large segment of the GOP base that is rabidly homophobic and transphobic. There are fewer and fewer votes there. And the reason we've advanced so quickly, the LGBT civil rights movement, is because gay, lesbian, bi, and trans people are randomly distributed throughout the population. We are born into straight families. We are born into every religious community's families, every racial group's families. If people of color, if African Americans were randomly distributed throughout the population, racism would have been easier to confront, easier to beat back. George Zimmerman would be in prison, and the Voting Rights Act would not have been gutted by the Supreme Court. So yeah, we have this secret weapon in the fact that we are born into straight people's families, and then they have to look at us for who we really are and not listen to demagogues like the people on Fox News or Mike Huckabee or any of the rest of the GOP hate clown show.